Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel Learn to Code with Noob. So as if you have seen my last video, you will notice I have explained features related to useEffect. So how you can actually define the dependencies and make this useEffect more reliable, right? So that this useEffect runs after the dependencies change on every render. So for example, on every render this count is changing, the useEffect will render, which is good practice and introduce less bugs. So so there are also some other strategies and some other ways in which we can introduce bugs, or some other ways we can eliminate bugs. So for example, I told you in my last video that we can actually specify functions or arrays to inside the dependencies. So before diving into that functions thing, let's just see how we can define the dependencies in this array, in the scenario of if you are using a function inside a useEffect. So there might be a scenario in which you are using a function inside a useEffect. So for example, if I have a function like do something, right, and if I basically like copy this and paste it, right? So I have a function which runs when this useEffect takes place. So now, and maybe this function is not actually in the useEffect, maybe this function is outside of a useEffect, right? And we are basically just calling this function inside a useEffect. So in this case, we might think that okay, we don't need to define the dependencies because this useEffect is not actually using the count dependency. But if you see indirectly, it is using the count dependency, because when this do something is triggered, right? When this something function is triggered, it is actually showing us the updated count value, right? So now what will happen is if we define no dependencies, so whenever you define no dependencies in the useEffect, it will only run once. So after your component is mounted, this useEffect will run once and that's it. So if I press this button and I try to change the count value, the count value will still change, but this useEffect will not run. And the reason is I haven't defined a dependency, right? So in order for this useEffect to run again on every count state change, I still have to define the prop dependency count. So in order to understand this more, usually what is a good practice is we just basically move this function inside here, and then we can like clearly see, okay, what are the dependencies this function is actually using, and we just plop that thing over here. And the reason why we move this is there is actually a lint plugin, which React gives you, and if you have a function like which is using a prop of this component in which this function is defined and it is in useEffect, it will actually complain you about if you haven't defined a dependency. So that is another reason why you want to move that function. I haven't attached that ESLint thing yet. That is a separate tutorial how we can attach that, but yeah, that is one of the things. Now Now there can be other scenarios in which we might want to move or like move the function outside of our component, right? So for example, if we want to say that, okay, I can't move a function inside an effect for some reason, I can't do that, or for some weird reason, right? So I can still like make this function, right, outside of this component right over here, and just supply a count value over here, and that will render this count value, right? So I can just simply say do something, right, and I have this count variable. Okay, let's see if this thing works or not. Okay, all right, so let me just kill this and open my terminal. Put this, so 852, right? I opened my demo project, so view rendered, right? So first, again, this is the view rendered is called twice because the first view rendered is after a component is mounted, and the second is after the component is updated. All right, so this is to change the count state. Okay, so you can see the view rendered is 1, but we will see if I have specified the count in here. I have, right? So let's just remove this. Okay, so let's remove the count dependency, and let me kill this thing again so that I can reset all my logs. Enter. All right, view rendered twice. Okay, this thing is again not working, right? So what is going on over here? Because the reason why this thing is not working is it is actually the same thing, right? Because this count value is changing, and we are saying, hey, don't do anything if this count value changes. So this effect is not running, right? So this effect runs only once. So it is kind of the same thing. So it doesn't matter if you have do something and you move this thing outside of the component, right? You still need to define the dependency over here, because indirectly again this do something is actually using a dependency, right? So that's that. So the only way you can define the do something outside of the effect, right? The only way you can do it is you might be able to like now you can now in this way you have moved the do something out of the use effect, right? But now you are able to run it every time, right? So let us see how this thing goes. Right, so I just opened demo project, view render 0, see view render 1 2 3 4 5. So this basically means like if you want to have a method, right, and you just want to have a method, but you don't want that method to be in the use effect for some reason, because you don't want to define it in the dependency, or there are other things in the use effect which you don't want to re-render, right? So you can also define that method outside of use effect. There is no need to define that method inside a use effect, right? All right. All right. So the next thing is, um, so there are some other ways to and strategies which you can define. I will just read this tutorial which React has, and that is a very good tutorial. It has like some other cases too, so I will just read those cases. All right. So the other case which uh, which these React devs are discussing is, so for example, if you have a function like this, like fetch product, right? And this fetch product, if you see, this fetch product is using a product ID, which is also a prop of another component product page, right? So we can also use a function as a dependency in here. So the reason why we want to use a function as a dependency over here is because this fetch product, right? Now this fetch product function will run, right, whenever the product ID changes. So this use callback is making sure whenever the product ID changes, this fetch product runs, right? So it does something with the product ID, right? So this fetch product and this fetch product is inside the product details page, which is this, right? So we are passing in this fetch product as a prop inside the product details, right? So now we are making sure whenever the product ID changes, right, this fetch product is getting called. And the way we do it is by defining a dependency as a function. So this is another way to do it with the combination of use callback hook. So we haven't discussed the use callback hook. We will discuss it in other videos, but this is one of the things. So now this is also very important example. So here you can see in the use effect we are using a set interval. So set interval basically means like the set count will get called after each and every 1 second. So set count is getting called, the count state is updating, right, every time after 1 second, right? So this effect actually depends on this count variable. But if you see, if I don't define any dependencies over here, right, so it will take the initial one, which is 0. So it will be 0 plus 1 1, right? So again we set count to 1, so nothing changes. So after that no state changes, right, because this count value is stale, right? Because this use effect is actually not getting rendered again on every count update. Only the set interval is getting rendered again, right? So what is the best way to do? So the other way to do it is we can actually use a form of set state. So we can actually do set count and we can pass in the function, right? So here we are basically saying it doesn't depend on the previous state. So over here, this the set count which we were passing it was depending on the previous state. So the previous state was this, right? But over here we are saying we don't want to depend on this count state. We are just passing in a function which updates by 1. So whatever the count is passed as a function, it updates by 1, right? So basically this set count is it comes very handy, because if you have seen my last videos of use state hook, I have mentioned that this set count function is the identity of this set count function is always stable, right? So now even if our even if we are not defining any dependencies, we are making sure that this count, at least this count function changes, right? At least we are updating this count function in a good way. All right. So yeah, so this is one of the other ways in which you are not defining any dependencies, right? It is not using any variables in the component, right? And this doesn't depend on count variable outside, which is this one, right? So, and over here, see, they are saying the identity of the set count function is guaranteed to be stable, so it's safe to omit. So now what happens is, again, I'm just reading it for more clarity. Now the set interval callback executes once a second, but each time the inner call to set count can use an up-to-date value for count called C in the callback here, right? So this is using an updated value of the count, which is C. Okay. All right. So these are some of the ways in which you can omit the dependencies, and some of the ways in which you can see where we should define dependencies. So mostly, or most of the time, we should define dependencies in the array, in this array, most of the time. And if we are not defining dependencies in the use effect, it basically means it will run only once and it will never run again. Right. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like this video, please don't forget to click on the like button. If you don't like this video, please mention why in the comment down below. Like, share and subscribe. Keep learning.